Good afternoon, everyone. It's just about 4:30, so I think it's time for us to get started. Welcome, everybody, particularly to any new people that we have joining us today. I'm sure we've probably got some of our regulars on the line as well. We've got quite a few people on today, slightly less than we normally have. I think that may be because of daylight saving, possibly in the UK. Some people may have the wrong time, I'm not sure, but it looks like we've still got about 100 or so of you on today. So welcome to everybody. Now, I've done 3 sound checks at the beginning, so hopefully you can all hear me loud and clear. We are doing data validation in Excel today, along with a couple of other things that I'm going to throw in. As always at the beginning, just a little bit of housekeeping. I'd just like to introduce myself for those of you who are maybe new to our webinars. My name's Deborah Ashby and I'm an IT trainer and subject matter expert, and I run webinars, I write training courses, and I mainly at the moment work for Filtered, Excel with Business and Skillsology. So if you're joining us today from any of those websites, welcome to everybody. I've been an IT trainer for a long time, about 10 years now, and 24 years in the IT industry. And I've trained lots and lots of people over the years, both in the UK and in Australia as well. So hopefully that means that I'm qualified to sit in front of you today and run this session. And this is it's not a particularly intense session compared to some of the ones that we've run recently, particularly the one last week, which was very busy and very intense. It's a little bit more mellow, this one. Really, really nice, really, really important, data validation. Let's take a look at our agenda. So I'm going to run through with you, first of all, what data validation is and why it's important, because you might have heard of the term, you might have seen the functions on the ribbons in Excel, but you might not be 100% sure exactly what it is and how it can help you. So we'll run over that first of all. We'll then look at the different types of data validation. And obviously, as always, we'll be using a live example and I'll walk you through those. I'll show you how you can add inputs and warning messages to your spreadsheets, and also how you can use data validation in conjunction with a VLOOKUP. I thought I'd throw that in there because probably the most amount of requests that we get is to run over VLOOKUP. So I thought I might as well add it in here, as it does work quite nicely with data validation. Now, the main bulk of this session is going to be all on data validation, but I am going to throw a couple of other things in there as well with regards to error-proofing formulas. We're going to look at data validation using index match as well, which is another lookup function. And I'm also going to show you how to protect cells and worksheets. And I actually had an email about this, and I'm wondering if that person's actually on the webinar today. I hope so, requesting that we run through how you can protect worksheets and stop people entering things into certain cells. So I thought it'd be quite nice to finish off with that as well, because it is a little bit tricky. It's a little bit backwards when we actually come to do it. So it's always a good thing to run through. So let's start out with that question. So what is data validation and why is it important? Why do we need it? Well, data validation allows you to control what's going into your spreadsheets. And why is that important? Well, you can probably think of many reasons. I'm sure, like I have, you've sometimes spent quite a long time putting together an Excel worksheet and it looks amazing and you're really happy with it. And then you send it to somebody else and they go in there and before you know it, all of it's messed up. You've got incorrect formulas, maybe you've got errors, things that input into that spreadsheet which shouldn't be there. So you have to go back and then you have to do a lot of work to put all that right. So what we really want to do here is we want to add in some checks and some controls which will guide people to enter the correct information. And a big part of that is using the features and functionalities within data validation and combining it with protecting cells and things like that, which we're also going to look at. So that's why it's important to keep your spreadsheets as error-free as possible and to maintain control and the integrity of that spreadsheet. Now I can see there's some comments coming in on the chat panel. It is a little bit difficult for me to check the chat panel going through. I will leave some time at the end for questions if any of you have any. All right, shall we jump into it? Let's jump into our first example. All right, so I'm going to come out here and just bear with me while I bring up my spreadsheets, which I appear to have closed down. That's not good. Right, so let's open up this one. And there we go. All right, we're going to start out with some basic examples as always. Now, what we have here is just a very, very simple spreadsheet. It's just got some column headings in there. And this might be, it could be any kind of data that you use for data validation. And essentially what we want is we're going to send this to people, and we want people to input their department, the start date of the project, project number, company code, and product description. But what I don't want them doing is entering in anything that's incorrect. So I want to control the information that's going to go in these cells down here. And I can do that using data validation. So let's start with this first one here, department. Now, if I want to control what people are going to type into there, I might want to have something like a drop-down list of departments where they can then go in, select their department, and it inputs that data into the cell, which means they don't have to go in and start free typing. If you can imagine somebody who works in HR, they might come along and they might put HR into the department. The next person might come along and put human resources. So already we have two things that are essentially the same, but people have chosen to input them in different ways. And we want to control that and make sure that it goes in exactly the same every single time. So let's take a look at data validation. I'm going to jump up to the data ribbon. And you'll find that in the data tools group just here, you have a data validation option. And you can see here as I hover over it, it says, pick from a list of rules to limit the type of data that can be entered into a cell. Perfect. Sounds exactly what we want. So let's jump into there and see what we have. So what you'll get is 3 tabs running across the top here: settings, input message, and error alerts. So we're going to look at settings first of all. And there are a few different ways that I can handle this. So I'm going to show you the first way. In this allow drop-down, this shows you different kinds of data that you can enter into this cell. Now, what I'm hoping for is a drop-down list. So I'm sure you can probably see from the options that we have there, the one I'm going to select is list. And now it's asking me for my source. So where is my list of departments that I want to use? And this is where we can do this in a couple of different ways. If I wanted to, I could just type in my departments in here. Okay, so I could type in something like HR, oops. And then I could separate it with a comma and type in the next department. So sales, comma, marketing, and I could carry on going through like that for all of the departments that I want to appear in that list. If I click on OK and click the drop down, you'll see there they are: HR, sales, and marketing. So that's one way that I could do it. Now, the problem with that is that I've hard-coded those into that data validation window. So if there were any more departments I wanted to add, what I would need to do would be to come back into data validation and manually add them into the source here. Now, that's entirely possible. It's not a problem. You can do it that way, but it's probably not the most efficient way. What essentially we want is to have a list that when we add a new department to the list, it automatically updates. So I'm going to clear this data validation, and we're going to do it a slightly different way. Now, I've got this list already set up on my master data spreadsheet. And if I jump across, you'll see I have slightly different departments. We're talking about departments in a women's store now. So I have accessories, women's, and sports. So I already have them in a list. And this is what you could essentially do. You could put all of your items in a big long list. You could have it on a different spreadsheet. You could have it on the same spreadsheet and hide the column if you don't want it showing. You could do this in numerous different ways. But let me show you how this works when you have your data already in a list. I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to back up to data validation. I'm going to select list. And this time for the source, instead of typing those names in, I'm just going to click the little arrow. I'm going to jump across to my master data, and I'm just going to select that cell range. And you can see it updates in the source. So it's telling me that we're working on the master data spreadsheet, and then it's giving me those cell references. And if I click on OK, I get my little drop-down list, and there we go. So that works fine. But this still provides us with a small issue. Let's go to our master data. Now, what if I wanted to add another division onto this list? Do you think my other list is going to update? What do you think? Type into the chat panel. If I add something down here, so let's say men's, is that going to update in my data validation list? Let me check the chat. No, exactly, well done. You are all very, very smart. Exactly, no, it's not. Because what we've referred to in our data validation, and if I just bring it back up again, is this specific cell range A4 to A6. And the new item that I've added is outside of that, it's in A7. So again, there's a couple of different ways I could cope with this. And let's just check the drop down. You can see it hasn't added it in automatically. I could go back into data validation and I could modify that data range if I wanted to. I could say A7 instead. But again, that means that every single time I update my master list, I'm going to have to go back in and update that formula. And I don't particularly want to do that. Ideally, what I want to do is I want to have it update automatically. Now, there is a couple of ways we can get around this. Let me jump back to master data. Now, I added men's on the bottom here, and we saw that it didn't update. But if I move men's to somewhere within the rest of the list, so I'm going to hold down my shift key, and I'm just going to drag men's up to underneath accessories. Do you think that's going to update in our data validation? Type into the chat panel. Yes, exactly. Yes. So if we go back to our data validation, click the drop down, you can see there it is because we've moved it within inside that data range. Now that's all well and good, but again, do we really want to, every time we add something onto the bottom here, have to move it up in order to get it to update? No, we don't. We want to be able to add things into the bottom and have it automatically update. So again, there are a couple of little cheeky techniques that you can use to get this to work correctly. And I'm going to show you the one which I tend to use. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because it also brings in another formula which you may not have used before, which is the indirect formula. So what I can do instead is I can turn my range here into a table. Now, if you've been on any of my sessions previously where we've talked about tables, you know I'm a massive fan of tables. I always put my data into a table, and one of the advantages of a table is that a table automatically expands to accommodate any new data. So if you're referring to that table in a formula or in your data validation, it's going to include everything that you've essentially added into that table. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to create a little table from this little list. Now, a shortcut way is just to press Control-T on your keyboard, and that will create a table out of your little list. So I'm going to make sure that I've got my table has headers just here and click on OK, like so. And I'm actually going to give my table a name. So up in the table name area, I'm going to call this table div for division and press enter. So now what I can do, and this may seem a little bit strange first of all, is I'm going to type in just here equals, and I'm just going to select this table, and you'll see that I'm hovering over the division part there until I get that little black arrow. And when I click, that picks up my table name basically, and also the column name, which is division. I'm now going to copy that. So I'm just going to go up to the formula bar, and I'm going to copy everything except the equals. Control-C to copy. Now, I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to go into my data validation. So back to data validation. I'm going to remove what we currently have in here. And I'm going to replace it with my table name, Control-V. Now, if I click OK, I'm going to get an error. Now, the reason why I get an error is because data validation doesn't like referring to table names. So this is where we have to be a little bit sneaky, and we have to kind of wrap it in what we call an indirect formula. And an indirect formula, if you've never used them before, will basically turn whatever's within it into text, and it can deal with that a lot better than linking to a table directly. So on the front of this, what I'm going to add is indirect, open bracket, and I need to put this in quote marks, because remember, indirect is basically turning this into a text input. So I'm going to surround it in quote marks and close my bracket. And now click on OK, and let's see what happens. Okay, so I have everything in there. Now, if I go back and if I add something to the bottom, so what department shall we add? Let's add home. You can see that the table is automatically expanded to accommodate. And if I go back to here and click the drop down, I now have home. So anything I add in the bottom is now going to be updated automatically in that data validation. So that's a little kind of sneaky way to get around that and get things to update automatically, that indirect function. Is everybody still with me? Everybody okay so far? Let me just do a quick, yes, cool, sneaky, I know. Lovely. Someone said, can you show the formula again? Can you expand so we can see? Sure. Are you talking about in the data validation? There we go. So we have equals indirect, then we have our table within quote marks. So that's the formula which I just added in. All right, so that's a sneaky little way of being able to get that to work effectively for you. And then what we're doing essentially is we're really just controlling what people enter into this particular cell. And I'll show you in a moment how you can copy that down so it applies to all of the cells. Let's for the moment move on to, actually before we move on, let me show you another part of data validation that's very important. We've just dealt with the settings tab at the moment, but we haven't looked at this input message and error alert. Now, these are really important and they help guide people towards what they should be typing into a cell. So I might want to have an input message, and an input message is basically something which will show up. It's a bit like a comment almost. When they hover over the cell, they'll get a little piece of text, and you might want to utilize that to tell people what they should be entering into the cell. So I might want to put something like, remember, please select from the drop-down list, something along those lines, and click on OK. And now you'll see I get that there when they click on that cell. Please select from the drop-down list. So now they're going to go, oh, okay, so I need to go in here and do that. You'd be surprised how many people don't see the little arrow when they click on a cell and just think that they can type in there. So it is sometimes worth having that little input cell just there. And the other one, if we jump back into data validation, the error alert, that's very similar as well. And you have 3 different types of error alert. You can have stop, warning, and information, and you can customize these with whichever messages you want. So I'm going to say stop, and I'm going to say stop, please select from the drop down. Click on OK. These are entirely optional. Now what that will mean is if somebody tries to type into that cell, you'll see they get that error message there, please select from the drop down. So essentially it doesn't let them type whatever they want into that cell. All right, so those are a couple of nice little checks that you can add into your spreadsheets as well. Let's move across to project start date. So we're going to deal with a couple of different things with regards to data validation here. Now I'm going to go back up to data validation and I'm going to go back to settings and click in this allow box. Now we looked at the list option before, which is fine, but now what we want to do is we want to restrict what they can put as the project start date. Now I might say that the project start date is going to always be in the future, so I don't want them to enter a date that's in the past. So I might want to say date has to be greater than today's date. Now, what's the function that we can use to find today's date? It's fairly straightforward. In fact, it's even a stupid question to ask you, because there is a function called today, which will basically, if I just cancel out here, if I show you what today does first of all, if I type in equals today, and today has no arguments, so that's why we just have the parentheses like so. What that does, it just gives you today's date, and that will automatically update. So if I was to come back to this spreadsheet tomorrow, that's going to say March the 28th. So that's a good way of getting today's date, and that's what we're going to use in the data validation. So I'm going to say date has to be greater than, and I'm going to say equals today, and click on OK. So now if I try and type into this cell yesterday's date, so the 26th, and I know my UK people online will be thinking you're writing the date back to front. I'm actually doing a course which is for an American audience at the moment, so I have all my settings set to the different date formats. If UK people are confused, that is why. You can see there it says this value doesn't match the data validation restriction. So it's saying I can't proceed because I haven't put in a date that's greater than today. Now, what about if I type in tomorrow's date? So 3/28/2019, that's absolutely fine. So again, I've restricted what people can type into a cell. Let's do the same thing for project number. Now, it might be for this that I want them to enter specific digits. So maybe our project numbers go from 1,000 to 2,000. So I want to make sure that they enter a number in between those two. Again, back to data validation. And this time we're going to use whole number. And we're going to say between 1,000 and 2,000. Like so. And again, we can easily test this. If I type in 950, I get an error message. However, if I type in 1,500, that's perfectly fine. Okay, so lots of different options when it comes to entering or restricting what's going into a cell. Now for the next one, company code, let's just pretend that my company code is always 5 characters long. So if they enter anything that's over 5 characters, that's going to be incorrect. So again, I can go back to data validation. And this time I'm going to say text length. And I'm going to say the text length must be equal to 5. And I'm going to click OK. So now if I enter C123456, that's going to be incorrect because it's over 5 characters. But if I enter C1234, that's absolutely fine. So again, another way of restricting that data. And just finally here, we'll do the last one just to finish this off, project description. Now, maybe I want people to elaborate quite a bit on the project description. So maybe I want the text in here to be greater than 20 characters. I don't want someone just putting in project is going well. I want them to put in or elaborate where they're up to with this project. So again, data validation. This time I'm going to go to text length again, but I'm going to say greater than 20 characters. So that means they have to enter something in that's quite long. So if I just put this is great, that's not going to work. I need to put something in. And remember again, you've got those within that data validation, you have the input message and the error alert to help them. So particularly for this one, you might want to say, please elaborate, more than 20 characters, something like that, which will help guide them when they're inputting things into their spreadsheets. All right, so those are just a really quick way of showing you all of the different ways that you can use data validation, and there's so many more options in there than what I've shown you. It's really worth having a play around, applying them to your own spreadsheets to see what works for you. Now, once we've done that, now, this might be a spreadsheet where we're going to carry on going down. So maybe this is going to lots of people and they have to enter in all of their department, project start dates, so on and so forth. So what I really want to do is I want to make sure that the data validation rules that we have applied in this first row apply to the rest of the rows, or as far down as I want to go. Now, the way that I can do this is very simple. I just highlight it and I do Control-C to copy. And then I just need to highlight down as far as I want to go. So it's entirely up to you how far down you go. So I'm going to say I want it to run that far down. And then if we go to the home ribbon and click the lower half of the paste button, we want to go into Paste Special. And you'll see there's an option there for validation. And click on OK. And now you'll see that when I click on any of these cells, I get my validation options, and all of the rules for these will apply as we go across. So remember that, copy it, Paste Special, data validation, I should say. Is everybody with me still? Let me just do a quick check. Brilliant, yes, wonderful. Anyone finding that helpful? Yeah, good, lots of yeses. I know this is reasonably basic, but you know, it's things that people don't know. So I never like to think that things are too basic. All right, let's move along, shall we? What are we on to next? Let's take a look at some data validation with VLOOKUPs. Who likes a VLOOKUP? I love a VLOOKUP. I love them so much. Me, Alan says, yes, love it. I get so many requests to run through VLOOKUP, so I try to throw them in kind of randomly in whichever sessions I'm running. And we can use data validation with VLOOKUP in this case, which makes it even better. Now, you can probably tell from the names that we have in here that I'm a bit of a Friends fan. I do love Friends. And so those are the people we're using in our example today. And what we're going to do is we're going to combine a VLOOKUP with data validation. So I have a table up here essentially, which is this just here. And it's got their full name, their customer number, their email address, phone number, age, job title, and annual income. I'm pretty sure that's not the annual income of the people who play these characters, but you know, based on what their job roles are in the television show, I've gone for that as an annual income. And what we want to do is we just want to complete this little table down here. And essentially what we're aiming for is I want to have this on a little data validation drop down so I can select one of the people from the table and it will pull up the customer number, email, phone number, all of the information for that person and populate it into these cells. So we need to do a little bit of setting up here. We need to set up our VLOOKUPs. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, as I said, I always make things into a table. So I'm going to go up here, I'm going to highlight my table. And can anybody remember the shortcut key for putting things into a table? We did it about 5 minutes ago. Yes, Control-T, wonderful. Control-T. And yes, my table has headers, so I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to give my table a name. So let's call this, we'll just call it info for argument's sake. Oh, I've already used that one. Okay, let's call it info2. There we go. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up my VLOOKUPs. Now, if VLOOKUPs are completely new to you, they're probably one of the most useful formulas in Excel. They're definitely one of the most popular formulas. And what it allows you to do is use a piece of information to look up other information in a table. So in this case, I'm going to use the name to pull back the rest of the information from this table. So let's do our VLOOKUP, and I'm going to do a VLOOKUP in a couple of different ways as we go through. So I'm going to type in equals, and we're going to type VLOOKUP, and we're going to open our bracket. Now, as usual, when you're creating a formula, you get your arguments underneath, and sometimes these kind of make sense to you, sometimes they don't. But the first one here, which is showing in bold, which is what it requires next, is the lookup value. Now, your lookup value is always going to be that piece of common information. So the information that I want to look up is the name, essentially. So I'm going to select cell B12, comma. It's now saying table array. Where do you want to look up this name? Now I want to look up the name Rachel Green in this table. And I've just named my table. So to make things really easy, if I press the F3 key on my keyboard, it's not bringing up my name. Why is it not doing that? Let me type it in, see if it brings it up. That's odd. It should bring it up in my table, but it's not. Excel, why do you do these things to me? Okay, let's just type it in. So you can just type it in and I can see info2 there. That's the name of my table. Comma. It's now asking me for the column index number. So in this case, the information I'm trying to pull back is the customer number. So the way that VLOOKUPs work is VLOOKUP numbers columns from left to right. So full name column is 1, customer number 2, email 3, phone number 4, so on and so forth. So if I'm trying to pull back the customer number, the number I'm going to enter in here, or the column index number, is 2, comma. And then it asks me, do I want to do an approximate match or an exact match? Well, I want it to exactly match the name Rachel Green. So I'm going to say false. And I'm going to close off my bracket and enter. And it pulls back that customer number just there. Now, I can't copy this down, unfortunately, because the information is going to change each time. The column number that we're referencing is going to change. So I'm going to run through and do the VLOOKUPs again. So this is really good practice. You're going to see this a few times. Hopefully it will go into your mind as we're running through it. Now I'm going to do it a slightly different way this time. I'm going to jump up to this little FX button, which is where we find all of our functions. And I'm going to search for VLOOKUP. Click on go, and there it is at the top. And I'm going to do it through the dialog box this time. Some people find this a lot easier than just typing it directly into the cell. The information is pretty much the same that's going in there, but it just kind of guides you a little bit. So again, our lookup value is cell B12. Our table array is our table name, so that's info2. Our column index number, now this time we're going for the email. So what's our column index number going to be this time? Yes, wonderful. Well done, Tamara. You were the first. Column index number is going to be 3. And our range lookup, again, we're doing an exact match. It's going to be false. Now remember, when it comes to true and false, you can type in 0 or 1 as well. So 0 means false and 1 means true in Excel. So I could just put a 0 in there and it will do exactly the same thing. And there we go. So let's do it a couple more times. I know this is a little bit tedious, but we're going to do our data validation in a moment. So again, lookup value, comma, table name, info2, comma, column index number is the phone number, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're doing an exact match, like so. There we go. Let's finish these off. Lookup value again, comma, table array, oops, info2, which I'm going to select, comma, and then age 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then false or 0 on the end. Now I'll save you from me doing that again and again. We'll just do those ones because the data validation will still work. So you would essentially in a real life scenario go down and do that for these ones as well. So what I want to do is I want to make the full name a data validation cell. I don't want people to come in here and just be able to type in exactly what they want. They might spell someone's name wrong, and the data that gets pulled back is not going to update correctly. So I'm going to make this cell a data validation cell. I'm going to go up to data. I'm going to go to data validation. I'm going to go to settings, and I'm going to select list. Where is my list? Well, my source is going to be everybody's name. So I'm just going to select it from the table and click on OK. And now I get my drop down. So when I select somebody else, you'll see that information automatically updates. Okay, so that's a really nice way of combining validation with VLOOKUPs. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Yes, yes, somebody's put, surely we can make the cell references absolute. Yes, you could. So you could go in here. Somebody's saying, why haven't you copied it down? You could go in here and make the cell references absolute. You could. The cell reference would be absolute if we're referring to this particular cell, but the information would be different for every VLOOKUP. So the VLOOKUP that we did here is different because we're choosing a different column number. So here we chose column number 2, here we chose column number 3, so on and so forth. But yes, you could use absolute references. I just took it as a nice opportunity to show you VLOOKUP, so we did it a few times in there. Lovely. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Now, this is just a little bit on error proofing your spreadsheets as we go through. And again, this is something, it's fairly simple and straightforward, but really, really good. Another thing we don't want when we're doing spreadsheets is if there are errors in a spreadsheet, so maybe we've typed in a formula or something and it hasn't worked, we really don't want our spreadsheets to be covered in errors. We want to be able to control that and make them look a little bit neater. So I'm going to show you an example here. We've got a very sort of basic table. Now you'll see we've got some problems in here. We have some numbers, but then the last one here has got a weird A in the bottom, which isn't correct. And then we have some denominators in here. And what I want to do is I basically just want to say equals the numerator divided by the denominator. So very straightforward. And if I drag that down, like so, you'll see that I get a couple of errors. Now, we're getting a div/0 error here, and these error messages are sometimes a little bit hard to decipher, but this just means we've basically tried to divide something by 0, which we have in this case, 36 divided by 0, which is why we're getting that error. And then in that one, we're getting a value error. So again, because we've got an A in here and a 5, that makes no sense whatsoever to Excel. So we're getting a value error. So we've got a couple of issues in there. Now, this is a very small set of data. Imagine if you had a huge spreadsheet and you had lots of these div and value errors going in. Now, a good way of highlighting your errors in your spreadsheet, if you want to find them quickly, is if you go to Home and Find and Select, within Go to Special, you have an option here which will allow you just to highlight any errors in your spreadsheet. So if you select Formulas and Errors, it will highlight those errors as it's done there. So it was a nice way of being able to find on your spreadsheet exactly where those error cells are, and you can either go in and fix them, or you can maybe add a little bit of error checking in there just to get rid of that message. So that's what we're going to do now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to here, to this one just here, and we're going to add in if error. So I'm going to type in equals, and let's do the calculation again first of all. So I'm going to say B4 divided by C4, exactly what we did last time. But this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it in an if error. So I'm going to type if error, open bracket, comma. So now it's saying if there is an error, so like we have down here, if there is an error, what do you want me to do? So I'm going to say if there's an error, just put a dash in the cell as opposed to giving me these ugly error messages. So to tell Excel to put a dash in, we need to put the dash, because essentially the dash is text, in between quote marks. And you could put whatever you wanted in there. You could put a piece of text if you wanted to. You could just put a blank. If you just wanted it to be a blank, you would just do 2 quote marks together like that. But I'm going to put a dash in there and close my bracket. And now if I was to copy that down, you'll see that I don't get those error messages, but I do get those dashes in there. Now, if error is fantastic. You can literally wrap it around most formulas and put a little bit of error checking in there if you wanted to. So it just tidies things up and makes your spreadsheet look less like it's got loads of errors all over it. So that's a good one to consider. Everybody with me so far? Yes, yes. Thank you, Polly. Polly's just put you're an Excel goddess. I wouldn't go that far, but thank you, Polly. Trust me, when I first started learning Excel, I was absolutely terrible at it. It's not something that comes naturally to me. It really isn't. There is hope for everybody. All right, so this example I was going to do down here is pretty much the same example. So again, it's just using if error. And I do have a little spreadsheet over here, and I will send you this spreadsheet because I actually do think this is quite useful to know if I zoom in a little bit. All the different kinds of errors that you might find in cells and what they actually mean. So you can see here, if you have a hash value, it displays when Excel finds a space or characters or something it doesn't understand. So like we just got, where we had an A and we tried to divide A by a number, we got the hash value error. It didn't recognize that character at all. If you have a hash name, it means that Excel can't understand the name of the formula. So if you've typed in the name of the formula incorrectly, you're going to get a hash name error. This one just here, where we just have all the hashes, that one's fairly obvious. You probably get that fairly frequently. It just means the column's not wide enough. I'm sure we've all had it where we've typed in a number into a cell and maybe the cell is kind of like that. We get a load of hash marks. It just means you need to widen the cell. So that one's fairly straightforward. That div divided by 0 error, again, we just had that, and that means you're asking Excel to divide a number by 0. Ref means the cell that you're referencing is not valid or doesn't exist. So you'll get that sometimes if you've maybe put a formula in that refers to maybe a cell that you've deleted or moved or it's not there anymore, something along those lines. Hash null means incorrect range operator has been used. So the operators would be things like plus, minus, divide, all of those kinds of things. NA means that the numbers you're referring to in a formula can't be found. And then finally, num, it means your formula contains numeric values that are not valid. So maybe it's looking for text and you've put in a number, something along those lines. And there are, in general, sort of these formulas down here, or functions, I should say, which you can add into your formulas to cope with those. If error tends to be the one that I use all the time, because it's a bit of a catch-all when it comes to flagging up errors, but there are more specific ones like if NA, which will deal with NA errors. And you've got is error, is and I will leave this for you. This is kind of a little, I guess, a little homework point, is to go away and have a little research of these and see the differences between them, because they are all different. As I said, I tend to use if error more than the others, but yeah, it's worth having a little look into those in case you want to use them in your spreadsheets. So let's jump back to this over here. Index match tends to strike fear into people. Again, this is along similar lines of VLOOKUP, and we're going to use data validation in this as well. Now, what we have here, and if you've never come across an index match formula before, index match is similar to VLOOKUP in many ways. So it is a lookup function, and it's actually two functions. Index is one function and match is another. But what we tend to do is combine the two together in order to do a really, really powerful lookup. It's a lot more powerful than VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP has its restrictions. As we noticed before when we were doing these VLOOKUPs, VLOOKUP counts columns from right to left. And that's the only way that VLOOKUP can work. So basically what you're looking up, so in this case it was the name, has to be in the leftmost column, because you're going to count the number of rows forward in order to pull back the column you want. You cannot count backwards in columns. So that is a restriction of VLOOKUP. It can only sort of count columns one way and can only look up in one direction. Index match, on the other hand, you can have a table of data and you can look this way, that way. You can look wherever you want to in the table to pull back your data. So that is the distinction between the two. Now what we have here, and we'll just do it very quickly, I don't want to get too much into the ins and outs of index match. We've done a webinar on index match and VLOOKUP previously, and I'll give you our YouTube channel at the end so you can go and check that video out if you want to. But what we have here is basically a table which contains information for some apps. So we've got some different apps just here. We've got the division that they belong to. We've got the amount of revenue they've generated and the profits. And what we want to do over here is to be able to select an app and have it pull back the division, the profit, and the revenue. So let's do an index match, and then we'll do a data validation to make this nice and easy. So index match, if you've never seen this before, this is a little bit of a treat for you. Now, we're going to start off with our equals, and we're going to type index. Now, what this does is you basically, when you're looking at this, what you need to say to yourself, and this is how I learned this, because I used to find it so confusing. I basically say to myself, okay, what am I looking for here? I'm looking for the division in this case. So I need to index the division column. So I'm going to select it, comma. It's now asking me for a row number. Now I'm going to say match, which is the second command, and it's asking me for a lookup value. I want it to match the app. So this cell here, H5, comma, and we're looking for the app in the apps column, comma. And I want it to do an exact match. So I want it to exactly match the word bejeweled. So I'm going to say 0 on the end. Let's just take a look at that formula before we hit enter. We're doing an index of where we're going to find the information that we want. So we want to pull back the division. So we're indexing the division column. How do we know what to pull back from the division column? Well, we want it to match whatever is in cell H5, which at the moment is bejeweled. So looking at our data, if I look in the table for bejeweled in that apps column, I want it to pull back the division. So I'm hoping when I hit enter, the result I'm going to get is game. Okay, so let's press enter. Oh, now this is a good one because I always forget this. I've forgotten to add an additional closing parentheses on the end of my formula. If you look at my formula, I've got my first open parentheses, my second, but I've only closed off one of them. You must always close off as many parentheses as you open. I've forgotten, but what Excel does for me is if I click yes, it corrects it for me. And there we go, I have game. So that's worked fine. What about profit? Let's do the same thing. Let's do another index match. So I'm going to say index, open bracket. Now this time, again, our index, we're indexing what we're looking for. So I'm looking for profit. So I want to index the profit column, comma, match. I'm doing the same thing. I want it to match bejeweled, or cell H5 in this case, in the apps column. And I want it to do an exact match, so 0. So again, let's look at that. We're indexing the profit column, and then we're matching bejeweled in the apps column, and it's going to return whatever's in the profit column. So again, I'm looking for this value here, 98490. So let's hit, oh, I almost did it again. There we go, closing parentheses. There we go. So I just need to increase my decimal places and it would be exactly the same as this in here. So that's the way that you can use index and match to pull back information. Now I've just been using one app up here, so you've probably guessed it. We're going to make this a data validation drop down. So I'm going to go to data. I'm going to go to data validation. I'm going to say list. And this time my list is going to be all of the apps. And click on OK. So now I should be able to flick between my apps and my data gets updated. And I could do the same for revenue if I wanted to. I won't go through that again. It's exactly the same pretty much as the ones that we've done here. So that's a quick run through of index match used in conjunction with data validation as well. So when you are using data validation, don't just think of it in terms of our first example, in terms of restricting data that's entered in. You can also combine it into other spreadsheets which maybe utilize VLOOKUPs and things like that. So it's a really, really fantastic, useful tool. Wonderful. All right, we've got about 10 minutes left, or about 5 minutes of training time, because I want to leave some time at the end for questions. The last thing I want to show you today is protecting cells and worksheets and really restricting what people can enter into your spreadsheets. And as I said at the beginning, this one was requested. I got an email from somebody who said that they really want to know how to do it, but they find it really confusing. And I understand completely why. Again, this is one of those things that you just think, Microsoft, why? Why do you do it that way? The first thing to remember when it comes to protecting cells in a worksheet, and when I say protect cells, what I mean is if I have this worksheet here, I might want people to be able to enter information in some cells. So I want them to be able to come in here and click the drop down. So I don't want to protect the entire sheet so they can't click on anything. That would be counterproductive. I want them to be able to click in here and select things. But maybe I don't want them to be able to change other things on the spreadsheet. So maybe I don't want them to change the column headings, or, I'm sure you've got more sensitive data on your spreadsheet, other things. So to restrict people as to which cells they can enter in is quite simple, but it works backwards. The way you need to think about this is that in Excel, by default, every cell is locked. And that's what seems odd, because you think, how can it be locked? Because I can go into any cell and I can start typing with no issue. But it's true, every cell is locked by default. The only reason you can type into cells is because there's been no protection applied to the worksheet. If I was to click Protect Sheets, you wouldn't be able to enter anything into this worksheet. Okay, so what we want is kind of a halfway house. We want to be able to say, okay, protect all of the cells except these ones. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do now. So what I want to say is I want to allow people to be able to enter into this cell range here, but everything else is locked. So I highlight my cell range that I want to unlock first of all, where I want them to enter the data. And I right click and go to Format Cells. And you'll see in here we have a protection tab. And can you see by default it's got locked in there? So I'm going to, uncheck it like so. And I'm going to click on OK. And now if I go in and protect the sheet, and I'm just going to enter a quick password there, like so. It should be that I can go in and I can make changes to these cells, which I can. But if I try to make a change outside of those cells I selected, I get an error. Okay, so that is how you can protect your worksheets. Select the cell range, right click, go to, it's not going to let me because that's protected, but we'll do it again. Right click, let me unprotect the worksheet. Bear with me. There we go. So select your cell range that you want people to be able to access, right click, Format Cells, Protection. Take the check mark out of locked and then protect the entire sheet. So that's a way again of restricting where people can type into the cells. And in addition to that, you've also put controls in, which means what they're inputting is controlled as well. And with both of those combined, you can sort of really, really ensure that your spreadsheet's not going to be full of errors. Okay, so hopefully those few little things there have helped you out a little bit. I'm going to leave it there. That is pretty much what I wanted to cover today. As I said, it's not a super intense session today, but hopefully we've covered a few things that people didn't know and you've picked up a couple of little tips and tricks. I will open it for questions now. So let me go to the, I think the questions are coming into the chat pane as opposed to Q&A. Bear with me while I just bring up the chat panel so I can see. Alan's put a lot of little gems. I know, a few little useful bits and bobs in there. Awesome. Thank you, Tamara. Okay, just a lot of people saying thank you. I learned some terrific shortcuts this time, every single time. Oh, thank you, Carol. Thank you for the tips. Thank you, thank you. Lots of thank yous. I'm going to scroll up and see if there's any questions. Timothy's put, could you make the name column a table as well and do the indirect method from before? Yes, you could. Yes, you could, Tim. Yeah. Scrolling up. Nita, I think I answered your question earlier about making the cell ranges absolute. Yes, you could do that. It was mainly just to show people VLOOKUP. I can't see too many questions. I've scrolled up quite a long way. Let me scroll back down again. Let's have a look. Can you show the highlight error message again? That's from Renee. Yes, I can, Renee. So let's jump back to over here. So yes, if you've got a spreadsheet and you want to highlight just where there's formula errors, you can go to Home, Find and Select, down to Go to Special. And there you have an option for formulas, so you need to select it. And if you just want to highlight the ones that contain errors, just untick everything else and leave a tick in errors, and it will highlight those cells for you. Nice and simple. Let me have a look. Can a data validation list alphabetize the list automatically? Oh, that's a good question. I'm just trying to think if it can. Let me go back into data validation. Let's see. List. You know what? I don't. I mean, I'm sure there's probably some kind of formula you might be able to put in here which would sort it. There is a sort function. I've never tried that. I don't know if it would work. For me, the best thing to do would be to put them in alphabetical order before you do the data validation. So I would sort my master data list and then do the data validation. But there may be, I can't say for definite because I've never tried using a function within data validation to sort them alphabetically. So that, again, might be something to have a little play around with. You might be able to. Let's have a look. Yep, I've just answered that one, Nita. Didn't your friends' names have to be sorted in alphabetical order? Your example didn't have it sorted. Over here. I didn't sort these before. No, I didn't sort them. I've just literally entered these in and run the VLOOKUP there. You could sort them before if you wanted to. I didn't. Can you please show us the protect sheet again? I can, yes. Let's go back to here. All right, so the protect sheet again. Remember, by default, all cells are locked. If I want to just allow people to enter into these cells, I select them, I right-click, I go to Format Cells, and I make sure, normally by default it will show like that, but you take the tick out of locked, click on OK, and then you go up to protect the worksheet. So that's on the review ribbon, protect sheet. Okay, and then you can type in your password, and that will apply the protection. So it will protect everything on the sheet except those cells that you've unlocked. Lovely. Someone's put, oh, I thought the VLOOKUP goes wacky if it's not sorted first, but yours worked. Yeah, you know what? Sometimes it does. I've had that as well. Sometimes it does, and I have to sort them. I'm not 100% sure the whys and wherefores as to why, but quite often on the webinars, I never sort my data when I'm showing VLOOKUP, and it seems to work every time. I don't know if I'm being lucky there and if I have to sort my data first, but it seems to work when I do it without sorting. As a follow-up to my question on the table for entry, it doesn't seem to allow a table within a table. Is that correct on your VLOOKUP tab? If all the data is in a table, can you make the name column a table within a table to utilize the indirect function like you showed previously? Hope that makes sense. So what you're saying is over here, you want to make essentially the name column a table within a table. It actually does that. If I was to go, let me show you, hang on. I think it does that automatically when you become part of a table. If I was to highlight, yeah. See, if I just highlight that, it basically makes it a table within a table, kind of. So we've got info 2, which is the name of the table. But if I highlight just one of the columns in the table, it gives it a name, and it names it by the column heading. So you could use it in that way, if that makes sense. All right, I'll take one more question. Alan, I thought equals is I thought this was the best. No. Is is slightly different to is error, and both are equally valid. Is I don't think includes or doesn't check for certain types of errors, where I think is error picks up more errors than is does. There's a very tiny difference between the two of them. And I'm sure there's no best option. I just use is error for most of mine. If you prefer is then that's entirely up to you. Alan, are you a fan of taking the grid lines away from the background? In some cases I am. If I'm displaying things like charts, sometimes I think grid lines in the background kind of make it a bit too messy, and I might remove the grid lines. But for a lot of the things that I do, so training purposes, I tend to find it's easier for people to kind of see and read what I'm doing if I have grid lines on. And if you're wondering how to take away grid lines, I think it's on my chat panel is in the way. Let me just try and move that out of the way. I think we're in view there and grid lines. So it depends if you like grid lines on or if you like grid lines off. All right, I'm going to leave it there, guys, because we have run out of time. Thank you so much for all the questions. I hope you found that useful. For those of you asking, yes, there is a recording, and that will be sent to you, as always, within 48 hours. You will receive a link to our video on YouTube, where you can have a little browse through and look at all of our old webinars. We upload all of our webinars to our YouTube channel. So if you need to go back and review, they're all on there. I will also send you my spreadsheet here, so you can have a little play around as you watch back the webinar. And let me just put up, I think I have it in this spreadsheet, in this PowerPoint presentation, my details. So if you have any questions related to this webinar, that is my email address, and that is our YouTube account. So if you go onto YouTube, and the user is EWB Promos. If you search for that, you will find our YouTube channel, but you will also get a direct link to this recording in the email that you'll get, and you'll get that on Friday. It's 48 hours after the webinar ends. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. I will see you next week for some more excelling. I hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are, and I will speak to you then. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.